David was having one of those days where everything felt like it was running 5 minutes behind. His meeting had gone longer than expected. Traffic was worse than usual. And now the sky had opened up with that kind of steady rain that soaks through everything. He pulled into the grocery store parking lot, already thinking about the dozen things he still needed to do before the day was over. He grabbed his umbrella and was halfway to the entrance when something made him pause. There, sitting on the curb near the shopping cart return, was a kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing a thin jacket that was doing absolutely nothing against the rain. The boy had his arms wrapped around his knees and his backpack sat next to him with what looked like a rip down one side. David's first instinct was to keep walking. It wasn't his business and he was already late, but something about the way the kid was sitting there so small and alone made him stop. He stood there for a moment, rain tapping on his umbrella, watching. The boy wasn't crying or making a scene. He was just sitting there staring at the ground like he was waiting for something that might never come. Against his better judgment, David walked over. As he got closer, he could see the kid was soaked through. His hair was plastered to his head and his sneakers had puddles forming around them. "Hey," David said, trying to sound casual. "You okay?" The boy looked up and for a second, there was this look in his eyes that David recognized but couldn't quite place. Guarded, careful, like he was deciding whether this stranger was safe or not. "I'm fine," the kid said, but his voice was quiet and he definitely wasn't fine. David crouched down, holding the umbrella over both of them. "You waiting for someone?" The boy nodded. "My foster mom was supposed to pick me up from the community center." "That's over there." He pointed across the parking lot to a building with a faded sign. "She was supposed to be here at 4:30. David checked his watch. "It was almost 6, that was a while ago," he said gently. "You try calling her?" The kid shook his head. "I don't have a phone, and the center closed at 5, so I can't go back inside." Something twisted in David's chest. This kid had been sitting out here in the rain for over an hour, just waiting, just hoping someone would remember him. "What's your name?" David asked. "Tommy." "Okay, Tommy. I'm David. How about we get you out of this rain, and we'll figure out what to do. That sound okay?" Tommy looked at him with that same careful expression, like he was weighing his options. Then he nodded slowly. David stood up and held the umbrella higher. "Come on, there's a coffee shop right there. We'll get you dried off and call someone who can help." They walked across the parking lot together, Tommy's shoes making squelching sounds with every step. Inside the coffee shop, the warm air and smell of coffee hit them immediately. David guided Tommy to a table near the window and handed him a stack of napkins. "Dry off what you can. I'll grab us something hot to drink." He ordered 2 hot chocolates and asked for extra napkins. When he came back to the table, Tommy was trying to wring water out of his jacket sleeves, not having much success. "Here," David said, sliding one of the cups across. "This'll help warm you up." Tommy wrapped his hands around the cup and David could see they were shaking a little. Whether from cold or something else, he wasn't sure. "So your foster mom," David started carefully. "Is there a number I can call? Or maybe the community center has her information?" "The center's closed now," Tommy said. "But they have emergency numbers. For social services." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, made David's stomach tighten. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened to this kid. "How long have you been with your foster family?" David asked, pulling out his phone. Tommy shrugged. 3 months. Before that, I was with the Hendersons for 4 months. And before that, the Pratts for like 6 months. 3 homes in just over a year. David felt something shift inside him, something he'd kept locked away for a long time. "That's a lot of moving around," he said quietly. "Yeah." Tommy took a sip of his hot chocolate. "It's okay, though. You get used to it." But the way he said it, David knew he wasn't used to it at all. Nobody got used to that. David made the call to social services, explaining the situation. They told him someone would be there within the hour. He thanked them and set his phone down. "Someone's coming to help," he told Tommy. "We'll wait here until they show up. That okay with you?" Tommy nodded, staring into his hot chocolate. Then after a long moment he said, "Thanks for not just walking by." David felt something catch in his throat. "Of course." They sat in silence for a bit, the sound of rain against the windows filling the space between them. David watched this kid who was trying so hard to seem okay, to act like sitting alone in the rain for over an hour was no big deal. And that's when it hit him why that look in Tommy's eyes had seemed so familiar. He'd had that same look once, a long time ago. "Can I ask you something?" Tommy said suddenly. "Sure. How come you stopped?" "Most people just walk by." David thought about how to answer that. The truth was complicated, and he wasn't sure he understood it himself yet. "I guess I saw someone who needed help," he said finally, "and I remembered what it feels like to need help and hope someone notices." Tommy looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. "Were you in foster care too?" Tommy asked quietly. David hadn't talked about this in years. He'd built a whole life on not talking about it, on moving forward and never looking back. But sitting here with this kid who was so much like he used to be, he found himself nodding. "Yeah, I was. Long time ago. Did it get better?" The question was so simple, so hopeful, and so heartbreaking all at once. "It did," David said honestly. "It took time, but yeah, it got better." Tommy seemed to consider this, taking another sip of his drink. "How old were you? When you got out, I mean." 18. "I aged out of the system. What's that like?" David remembered turning 18, getting his few belongings packed into garbage bags and stepping out into a world he was supposed to navigate alone. He remembered the fear, the uncertainty, the feeling of being completely untethered. "It's scary," he admitted, "but you figure it out. You find your way. Do you ever think about going back? To see the people you lived with?" David shook his head slowly. "No, I kind of just tried to move forward. Start fresh. But don't you wonder about them, or about other kids who were there?" Before David could answer, the door to the coffee shop opened and a woman in a raincoat came in, looking around. She spotted them and walked over. "Tommy?" she asked. The boy nodded. "I'm Patricia from Social Services. I'm so sorry this happened." She looked at David. "And you must be the gentleman who called. Thank you so much for staying with him." David stood up. "Is everything okay? With his foster family?" Patricia's expression was professional but tired. "There was a family emergency. His foster mother's sister was in an accident and she rushed to the hospital. In the confusion, she forgot to notify anyone about Tommy." "Forgot." David felt anger flash through him, but he kept his voice calm. "So what happens now?" "I'll take Tommy back to his placement. We'll make sure this doesn't happen again." Tommy stood up, gathering his wet backpack. He looked at David, and for a second he seemed like he wanted to say something. Then he just said, "Wow, bye, David. Bye, Tommy." As Patricia led him toward the door, Tommy turned back one more time. "Thanks for not pretending I was invisible." And then they were gone, out into the rain, and David was standing there alone in the coffee shop with 2 empty hot chocolate cups and a feeling in his chest that he couldn't quite name. He sat back down, staring out at the parking lot. That curb where Tommy had been sitting was empty now, just rain and shadows. But David couldn't stop thinking about what the kid had said. About going back. About wondering. For 20 years, he'd convinced himself that the best way forward was to never look back, to build a new life and leave the old one behind. But sitting with Tommy, seeing that same look he'd once worn, hearing those same questions he'd once asked, something had cracked open inside him. Maybe moving forward didn't mean forgetting where you came from. Maybe it meant something else entirely. David finished his coffee, picked up his phone, and instead of heading to the grocery store, he sat there in that coffee shop for another hour. He didn't know what he was thinking about exactly. Or maybe he did, and he just wasn't ready to admit it yet. All he knew was that something had changed. A door he'd closed a long time ago had opened just a crack, and he wasn't sure he could close it again. David couldn't sleep that night. He kept seeing Tommy sitting on that curb, kept hearing the kid say, "You get used to it," in that flat, resigned voice. At 3 in the morning, he gave up trying and made coffee, sitting at his kitchen table in the dark. He'd spent 2 decades building a life that looked nothing like his childhood. Good job, nice apartment, savings account, stability, everything he'd never had growing up. And he'd done it by looking forward, never back. It had worked. Until now, the next few days were strange. David went through his normal routine, but his mind kept drifting. He'd be in a meeting, and suddenly he'd remember sitting in a social worker's office waiting to hear where he'd be living next. He'd be making dinner, and he'd think about all those temporary kitchens and all those temporary homes. On Thursday, he found himself driving past the community center where Tommy had been waiting. He didn't mean to. He told himself he was just taking a different route home. But there he was, slowing down, looking at the building, wondering if the kid was okay. It was ridiculous. He didn't even know Tommy's last name. The kid probably hadn't thought about him since that night. But David couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, like an earthquake that starts small but changes the whole landscape. Friday evening, he did something he hadn't done in years. He went online and started reading about the local foster care system. The statistics hit him like a punch to the gut. Over 400 kids in care in his county alone. Not enough foster homes. Kids moved an average of 3 times before they turned 18. 60% struggled after aging out. He'd been one of those statistics once. He just never thought about it anymore. The next morning, David found Patricia's card in his wallet. He'd saved it without really knowing why. He stared at it for a long time before pulling out his phone and dialing. Child Services, this is Patricia. Hi, this is David Reed. I was the one who stayed with Tommy last Tuesday. At the coffee shop, there was a pause. Oh yes, I remember. Is everything all right? Yeah, I just wanted to check if Tommy was okay. Make sure he got back safely. That's very kind of you. Yes, he's fine. The situation was resolved. Her voice was professional, careful. Privacy rules, probably. David should have said okay and hung up. Instead, he heard himself ask, "Do you have volunteer opportunities? For the foster care program?" Another pause, longer this time. Actually, we do. We're always looking for mentors, tutors, people who can spend time with kids in the system. Can I ask what made you interested? I was in foster care. Long time ago. And meeting Tommy, I don't know, it made me think maybe I could help somehow. Patricia's voice warmed. Those are often our best volunteers. People who understand what these kids are going through. We have an information session next Wednesday at the community center. 6 o'clock. Would you like me to put your name down? David felt his heart beating faster. Yes, please. After he hung up, he sat there staring at his phone. What was he doing? He had a busy life, a demanding job. He didn't have time for this. But even as he thought it, he knew he was going to show up on Wednesday. The week crawled by. David caught himself thinking about what he'd say at the information session, whether he'd see Tommy there, whether this was a terrible idea. Tuesday night, he almost called Patricia to cancel. Wednesday morning, he convinced himself to at least show up and see what it was about. The community center was busier than he expected. 20 or so people were gathered in a meeting room with folding chairs and fluorescent lights. Patricia was there, organizing papers at the front. She smiled when she saw him. David, you came. I'm glad. He took a seat near the back, feeling out of place. The other people looked like they belonged here. A couple of teachers, some retired folks, a few people his age who probably had more free time than he did. Patricia started the presentation. She talked about the need for positive adult relationships in foster kids' lives, about how an hour a week could make a real difference, about tutoring, mentoring, just being someone consistent these kids could count on. Many of our volunteers are former foster youth themselves, Patricia said, and David felt several people glance his way. They understand in a way others can't. The uncertainty, the feeling of not belonging anywhere, the challenge of trying to focus on school when you don't know where you'll be sleeping next month. Every word landed like she was describing his childhood exactly. After the presentation, people milled around asking questions and filling out forms. David was reading through the volunteer application when he heard a familiar voice. David? He turned and there was Tommy, holding a backpack that looked newer than the torn one from last week. The kid's face lit up in a way that made David's chest tighten. Hey Tommy, what are you doing here? I come here after school sometimes. They have a homework room. What are you doing here? David held up the volunteer application. Thought I might help out. Tutoring maybe. Tommy's eyes got wide. Really? That's so cool. I mean, you actually came back. Yeah, I did. Most people don't come back. The simple statement carried so much weight. Most people don't come back. Most people walk away and never think about it again. David had been one of those people for 20 years. Well, I'm here now, David said. Patricia walked over looking pleased. Tommy, you remember David? David, Tommy could actually use some help with math. He's really smart, but all the school changes have put him behind. Would you be interested in tutoring him specifically? David looked at Tommy, who was trying to act casual but couldn't quite hide the hope on his face. Yeah, David said. I'd like that. They worked out the details. David would come every Tuesday evening for an hour. They'd work on math, and Tommy could ask for help with anything else he needed. It was simple, straightforward. That first Tuesday, David showed up early, nervous in a way he hadn't expected. Tommy was already there, waiting in the homework room with his math book open. "Ready to do this?" David asked. Tommy nodded, and they got to work. What surprised David was how natural it felt. Tommy was struggling with fractions, and David found himself explaining them in ways he wished someone had explained them to him years ago. The kid was smart, really smart. He just needed someone to take the time. "You're good at this," Tommy said after they'd worked through several problems. "Teaching, I mean. Thanks. You're a quick learner." "I have to be. Every school does things different. You fall behind and nobody has time to help you catch up." David set down his pen. "That must be frustrating." Tommy shrugged, but there was something in his expression that made David press a little. "How are things?"
"With your foster family?"
"Fine, I guess. They're nice. They just have their own kids too, and they're busy." Translation: Tommy was just another kid to manage, not really part of the family. David knew that feeling. Over the next few weeks, something shifted. The tutoring sessions became the highlight of David's week. He'd find himself looking forward to Tuesday evenings, wondering what Tommy would want to work on, what stories he'd share about school. Tommy opened up more each week. About the teacher who didn't call on him because she forgot he was new. About the kids who didn't invite him to birthday parties because they knew he might not be there next month. About lying awake wondering if this placement would last. And David found himself sharing too. Little things at first, then bigger ones. About the caseworker who visited twice a year if he was lucky. About the foster parents who were kind but kept him at arm's length. About learning not to unpack his suitcase completely because he'd probably be packing it again soon. One evening after they'd finished with math, Tommy asked, "Did you have friends?" "When you were in care?" David thought back, "And a few, but it was hard to keep them when I moved around." "Yeah." Tommy picked at the corner of his notebook. "Do you remember their names?" "Some of them." David paused. "There was a girl, actually, in one of my foster homes. Her name was Katie. We were there together for about a year. She was 2 years younger than me. What happened to her? I don't know. When I aged out, we lost touch." David felt something twist in his chest. "I've thought about looking for her over the years, but I never did." "How come?" It was the same question from that first night, and David still didn't have a good answer. "I guess I thought it was easier to move forward than to look back." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "But what if she's looking for you? What if she wonders what happened to you?" The question stayed with David long after Tommy's foster mom picked him up that evening. He sat in his car in the parking lot, engine running, heat blasting, thinking about Katie. They'd been close in that way kids are when they're going through something hard together. She'd been scared all the time, and he'd tried to look out for her even though he was barely older. When he aged out at 18, he got her address, promised to write. He'd written once, maybe twice. Then life got busy and the letters stopped. He told himself she'd moved on, found a better family, forgotten about him. But what if she hadn't? That night, David did something he'd avoided for years. He went on social media and searched for Katie Peterson. There were dozens of them. He scrolled through profiles looking for a face that matched the 13-year-old girl he remembered. And then he found her. The profile picture showed a woman in her mid-30s with Katie's smile. The bio said she lived in Denver and worked as an elementary school teacher. There were photos of her with 2 young kids. David stared at the screen for a long time. His finger hovered over the send message button. What would he even say? "Hey, remember me? Sorry I disappeared for 24 years?" He closed the laptop. But the next Tuesday, when Tommy asked if he'd found Katie, David admitted he had. "Did you message her?" "Not yet." "Why not?" "I don't know what to say." Tommy looked at him with those 2 old eyes. "You could just say hi. Tell her you've been thinking about her. That you're glad she's okay." It sounded so simple when Tommy said it. That night, David opened his laptop again. He stared at Katie's profile for another hour. Then, before he could overthink it anymore, he started typing. "Hi, Katie, I don't know if you remember me. We were in the Johnsons' foster home together in 2001. I've thought about you over the years and wondered how you were doing. I saw you're a teacher now. That's great. I hope you're doing well." David read his finger hovered over send. Then he pressed it. 3 days later, she replied, "David, of course I remember you. I've wondered about you so many times. I'd love to catch up. Do you have time for a call? David read the message 5 times, his heart pounding. She'd been wondering about him too. All these years he'd thought moving forward meant leaving everything behind. But maybe that was never true. Maybe some connections were worth holding on to. He replied, and they set up a call for the weekend. When Saturday came, David was more nervous than he'd been in years. The phone rang and Katie's voice came through warm and familiar despite the decades. David. Wow. I can't believe it's really you. They talked for 2 hours, about where life had taken them, about the Johnsons and the other kids who'd been there, about the system that had shaped them both. I became a teacher because of those years, Katie said. I wanted to be the person I needed back then. Someone who notices the quiet kids, the ones who seem fine but aren't. That makes sense, David said quietly. What made you reach out now? After all this time? David told her about Tommy, about sitting in that coffee shop, about something cracking open inside him. I think I spent so long trying to forget where I came from that I convinced myself it didn't matter anymore. But it does. It always did, yeah, Katie said softly. It does. When they hung up, David felt different. Lighter somehow. Like he'd been carrying something heavy without realizing it and finally set it down. The next Tuesday, Tommy asked how the call went. Good, David said. Really good. Thank you for pushing me to reach out. Tommy grinned. See? Sometimes looking back isn't bad. No, David agreed. Sometimes it's exactly what you need to do. The weeks turned into months and tutoring Tommy became as natural as breathing. David found himself thinking about the kid during the day, wondering how his math test went, whether his foster family remembered to pick him up from school. It was strange how quickly someone could become important to you. Katie called every few weeks too. They'd talk about their lives, about work, about the past. She sent him photos of her kids, told him stories about her students. It felt like finding a piece of himself he didn't know was missing. One evening in late spring, David was at the community center early, waiting for Tommy. Patricia came over with a clipboard and that look people get when they're about to ask for something. David, can I talk to you for a minute? Sure, she sat down across from him. You've been volunteering for almost 5 months now. Tommy's grades have improved, but more than that, he's different. More confident, happier, you're really making a difference. Thanks. He's a good kid, he is. And there are a lot more like him who need help. Patricia leaned forward. We're starting a new mentor coordinator program. Someone to help match volunteers with kids, organize activities, that kind of thing. It's a bigger time commitment, but I immediately thought of you. David felt his stomach flip. I don't know. I have my job and I'm still pretty new to all this. Think about it. You understand these kids in a way most people can't. And you're good at this. David, really good. After she walked away, David sat there feeling that familiar pull between the life he'd built and this new thing that was asking more of him. It would mean more time, more involvement, more connection to a world he'd spent years trying to leave behind. When Tommy arrived, they worked through algebra problems, but David's mind kept wandering. Finally, Tommy noticed. You okay? You seem distracted, David set down his pen. Patricia asked me to take on more responsibility here. Be a mentor coordinator. That's awesome. You should do it. It's a lot more time, a lot more commitment. Tommy looked at him with that direct way kids have when they see through your excuses. Are you scared? The question caught David off guard. What? Are you scared? Of doing more? David wanted to say no, but sitting across from this kid who'd learned to spot fear and uncertainty from a mile away, he couldn't lie. Maybe a little. This place, these kids, it brings up a lot of stuff for me. Bad stuff? Some, but also stuff I've been avoiding for a long time. Tommy nodded slowly. My old caseworker told me once that the hard things are usually the important things. David smiled despite himself. That's pretty wise, I know. Tommy grinned. So are you going to do it? I'm thinking about it. That night, driving home, David found himself taking a detour. He didn't plan it, but suddenly he was on Maple Street, slowing down in front of a house he hadn't seen in 24 years. The Johnson house looked smaller than he remembered. The porch was still there where he used to sit and read. The maple tree in the front yard was bigger now. The paint was different, lighter blue instead of white. He sat in his car, engine idling, staring at the house. He'd lived there for 14 months when he was 16. It was the longest he'd stayed anywhere in foster care. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were decent people. They followed the rules, made sure he had food and clean clothes, and got to school on time. They just never quite knew what to do with him. He remembered lying in bed in that house, listening to their biological son laughing with friends downstairs, feeling like he was watching someone else's life through a window. A light came on in the living room and David put the car in drive. He wasn't ready to knock on the door, wasn't sure he'd ever be ready. But something had brought him here, and he needed to understand what. Over the next few days, David couldn't stop thinking about the house, about Tommy's question, about Patricia's offer. He found himself researching the foster care system more, reading studies, understanding the scope of the problem he'd once been a small part of. On Thursday, he called Katie. "I think I need to do more," he said without preamble. "With the foster care program." "Okay," she said carefully. "What brought this on?" He told her about Patricia's offer, about driving past the Johnson house, about feeling like he was standing at a crossroads. "For so long, I thought the best thing I could do was build a successful life and prove that foster kids could make it, that was enough. But now I'm wondering if that was just me running away." "You weren't running away, David, you were surviving. There's a difference, this may be. But I'm not just surviving anymore, and meeting Tommy, reconnecting with you, it's making me realize that maybe I can do more than just get through life. Maybe I can actually help change things for kids like we were." Katie was quiet for a moment.
Can I tell you something?
"When you reached out when we started talking again, it helped me too. I'd spent years working with kids in need, but I'd never really dealt with my own past. Talking with you, sharing those memories, it helped me understand myself better." "Really?" "Yeah. Sometimes we need to go back before we can truly move forward. Not to get stuck there, but to understand how it shaped us." After they hung up, David sat with that thought, going back to move forward, not running away but not getting stuck either. Finding a way to honor the past while building the future. The next Tuesday, he told Patricia he'd take the coordinator position. Her face lit up. "Really? That's wonderful. I have conditions, though. I keep tutoring Tommy, that doesn't change." "Of course. That's your primary commitment. The coordinator role is about helping others find that same connection." Over the next month, David trained for the new role. He learned about matching volunteers with kids, about organizing group activities, about creating a community where foster kids could feel less alone. He met other volunteers, many of them former foster youth themselves. There was Robert, who'd aged out 10 years ago and now ran coding workshops for teenagers. There was Jennifer, who organized art therapy sessions because drawing had saved her during her hardest years. There was Miguel, who taught kids how to cook because learning to feed himself had been the first step toward independence. They all had stories. They'd all found ways to transform their pain into purpose. One evening, after a coordinator meeting, David found himself back on Maple Street. This time he parked and got out of the car. He stood on the sidewalk, looking at the house, letting the memories come. Katie's voice echoed in his head, going back to move forward. He walked up to the porch and knocked before he could talk himself out of it. A woman answered, maybe 60 years old with gray hair and kind eyes. "Not Mrs. Johnson, the house had changed hands. Can I help you?" "Sorry to bother you. I used to live here a long time ago. Foster kid. I was just in the neighborhood and wanted to see the place." Her expression softened. "Oh, how nice. Would you like to come in? Look around?" David was surprised by the offer. "Are you sure?" "Of course. We bought the house from the Johnsons about 8 years ago. They moved to Florida. Retirement, you know." David stepped inside and the layout was the same, but everything else was different. New furniture, new paint, new life. The stairs where he used to sit were still there, but they'd been refinished. The kitchen had been remodeled. The Johnsons were foster parents, the woman said. They told us when we bought the place. Said some good kids had lived here over the years. Yeah, some of us did. Were they good to you? David thought about how to answer. They weren't bad. They just didn't really know how to connect. I was more like a responsibility than a kid, if that makes sense. She nodded. I'm sorry. That must have been lonely. It was, David realized. It had been lonely. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, persistent way that had shaped how he saw himself. Thank you for letting me look around, he said. Of course, and for what it's worth, I think what you're doing now, working with foster kids, that matters. David looked at her, confused. How did you know? She smiled. You have that look. People who've been through hard things and decided to help others through them, they have this look. My sister was in foster care. I recognize it. After he left, David sat in his car for a long time. The house wasn't scary or sad anymore. It was just a house where a lonely teenager once lived, where that teenager survived and eventually grew into someone who could help others survive too. The next week, David organized his first group activity as coordinator, a pizza party at the community center for foster kids and their mentors. 20 kids showed up, including Tommy. David watched them playing games, eating pizza, just being kids for a few hours. He saw the volunteers, all of them giving their time because they cared. And he felt something click into place. This was what moving forward looked like. Not forgetting where you came from, but using it to light the way for others. Tommy came over, holding a paper plate with 3 slices of pizza. This is really cool. David, everyone's having fun. Yeah. It turned out pretty well. You know what's weird? A few months ago, I was sitting in the rain thinking nobody cared. And now I'm here because you did. David felt his throat tighten. You've helped me too, you know. More than you realize. How? You reminded me that running away from the past doesn't make it go away. It just makes you tired. Facing it, using it, that's what makes it worth something. Tommy took a bite of pizza considering this. Then he said, my caseworker told me you're looking for more volunteers. People to do what you do with me. Yeah, we need more mentors here. There's this kid, Brian, he's in my foster home. He's 12 and really struggles with reading. He pretends he doesn't care, but I think he's just embarrassed. You think he'd want help? Maybe, if someone asked who understood what it's like. David smiled. I'll talk to Patricia about it. As the party wound down and kids started leaving with their mentors or caseworkers, David helped clean up. Patricia came over looking happy and exhausted. This was great, David. We should do this monthly. Yeah, I think so too. You know what I noticed? You're different than when you first showed up. More comfortable. Like you found where you belong. David thought about that. Belonging. It was something he'd chased his whole life. Nice apartment, good job, all the markers of success. But he'd never quite felt like he belonged anywhere until now. Standing in this community center, surrounded by kids who needed someone to see them, volunteers who understood them, a whole network of people who'd transformed their pain into purpose. Maybe this was what belonging felt like. Not a place, but a purpose. That night, David called Katie and told her about the party, about the kid who needed reading help, about organizing monthly events. I think I understand now, he said. Why you became a teacher. Why you wanted to be the person you needed. Yeah? It's not about saving kids or being a hero. It's about showing them they're not invisible, that someone sees them and cares about what happens to them. Exactly, Katie said softly. That's exactly it. After they hung up, David sat on his couch looking at his apartment. Everything was the same as it had been 6 months ago. Same furniture, same routine, same life. But he was completely different. He'd spent 20 years building walls between himself and his past. And in one rainy evening, a kid sitting on a curb had knocked the first brick loose. Now the whole wall was coming down, and instead of feeling vulnerable, David felt free. His phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Brian's foster mom says he'd like to meet you. Interested in taking on another tutoring case? David smiled and typed back, absolutely. Meeting Brian was different from meeting Tommy. The 12-year-old showed up to their first tutoring session with his arms crossed and his face set in that defensive expression David recognized immediately. This was a kid who'd been disappointed too many times to hope for anything different. So you're the tutor, Brian said, dropping into the chair like he was being forced into detention. That's me. I'm David. Tommy said you're cool. Tommy's wrong about a lot of things. David almost laughed. Fair enough. How about we start and you can decide for yourself? Over the next hour, David learned that Brian could barely read at a 4th grade level. He'd been moved 7 times in 5 years, missing chunks of school each time. Teachers had either pushed him through or given up on him. Now he was in 7th grade, drowning and hiding it by acting like he didn't care. Books are stupid anyway, Brian said when David tried to work through a passage with him. You don't need to read to make money. Maybe not. But you need to read to know what you're signing, to understand your rights, to not let people take advantage of you. Something flickered in Brian's expression. Yeah, I guess. They ended the session with Brian grudgingly agreeing to come back next week. As he was leaving, he turned back. Tommy said you were in foster care too. Yeah, I was. Did you feel stupid? Because you were behind in school? The question landed like a punch. All the time. Brian nodded slowly, then left without another word. David sat there for a long time after, remembering what it felt like to sit in a classroom, completely lost, too embarrassed to ask for help. He'd eventually figured it out, but those years had left scars. That night, the dreams started. David hadn't dreamed about his childhood in years. He'd trained himself not to, but now, night after night, the memories came flooding back. The caseworker who mixed up his name with another kid's. The foster father who locked the refrigerator. The emergency placement at 2 a.m. with garbage bags full of his stuff. He'd wake up at 3, 4 a.m, heart pounding, trying to shake off the feeling of being 14 again and completely powerless. Katie noticed during their next call. "You sound tired, not sleeping great. Want to talk about it?" David told her about the dreams, about memories he thought he'd dealt with coming back stronger than ever. "Maybe you never really dealt with them," Katie said gently. "Maybe you just buried them. Isn't that the same thing?" "Not even close." She told him about going to therapy a few years back, about finally processing the trauma of being moved 9 times before she was 17, about learning that healing wasn't forgetting, it was understanding and accepting and choosing to move forward anyway. "Have you ever thought about talking to someone? A therapist, I mean?" David had always thought therapy was for people who couldn't handle things on their own. But lying awake at night, watching the ceiling, feeling like that scared kid again, maybe he couldn't handle it on his own. "Maybe," he said. Over the next few weeks, David threw himself into the coordinator work. He matched 5 new volunteers with kids. He organized a field trip to a science museum. He started a weekly homework club. If he stayed busy enough, he could almost outrun the dreams, but they kept coming. Tommy noticed during one of their sessions. David had zoned out while Tommy was explaining a math problem. "David, you okay?" "Sorry, yeah." "What were you saying?" Tommy studied him. "You look like my friend Alex did before he had a breakdown. Are you sleeping?" "Not really." "How come?" David thought about deflecting, but Tommy had been honest with him from the beginning. He deserved the same. "I've been having a lot of memories lately. From when I was in foster care. Dreams mostly. They're making it hard to sleep." "Bad memories?" "Some of them." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "My therapist says memories are like splinters. If you don't pull them out and deal with them, they just get infected and hurt worse." "You have a therapist?" "Yeah, all foster kids are supposed to. Most of us just sit there and don't talk, but mine's actually pretty cool." Tommy hesitated. "You should maybe talk to someone. The memories probably want you to deal with them." It was strange getting life advice from an 11-year-old. But maybe Tommy understood this better than most adults. That weekend, David finally did what he'd been thinking about for weeks. He called Katie and asked for her therapist's name. Dr. Martinez had an opening 2 weeks out. David almost canceled 3 times before the appointment. He showed up 10 minutes early, sat in the waiting room, and seriously considered leaving. Then the door opened, and a woman about his age with warm eyes and a calm presence called his name. "David? Come on in." The first session was harder than he expected. Dr. Martinez asked him to tell his story, and David realized he'd never told it start to finish before. He'd shared pieces with Katie, with Tommy, but never the whole thing. He talked about being removed from his biological home at 8, about the parade of caseworkers in foster homes, about aging out at 18 with $200 and no idea how to survive, about building a life through sheer force of will and determination never to need anyone again. "And now?" Dr. Martinez asked. "Now I'm working with foster kids and it's bringing everything back." "Is that bad?" "It's confusing. I thought I'd dealt with all this. Moved past it." "You survived it. That's not the same as processing it." Over the next few sessions, Dr. Martinez helped David understand something he'd never considered. He hadn't been running away from his past. He'd been running from the feelings that came with it. The fear, the loneliness, the helplessness. Building a successful life was his way of proving he wasn't that scared kid anymore. "But you don't have to prove that," Dr. Martinez said during their 4th session. "You can just be both. The successful adult and the kid who went through hard things. They're not mutually exclusive. It feels like if I acknowledge how bad it was, I'm admitting I'm still damaged. Or maybe you're admitting you're human, that hard things affected you and that's okay." David sat with that, being human, having feelings about what happened. Not pretending it didn't matter because he'd built a good life despite it. The dreams didn't stop, but they changed. Instead of waking up terrified, David started waking up sad. Grieving, Dr. Martinez said, for the childhood he didn't get to have. One night he dreamed about Katie. Not the adult Katie, but the 13-year-old girl from the Johnson house. In the dream she was crying and he was trying to help but couldn't reach her. He woke up with tears on his face. He called her the next morning even though it was early. "Hello?" Her voice was thick with sleep. "Sorry, did I wake you?" "David, what's wrong?" He told her about the dream, about therapy, about finally letting himself feel everything he'd been avoiding for decades. "I'm sorry I lost touch with you," he said, "after I aged out. I should have tried harder to stay connected." Katie was quiet for a long moment. "I was angry at you for a long time. I felt abandoned. But I understand now. You were 18 and barely surviving. You didn't have the capacity to take care of me, too. Still, I'm sorry. I forgive you. And David, I'm glad you're dealing with this now. Better late than never." At the community center, David's work continued. Brian slowly opened up, admitting he was scared of being stupid, of never catching up, of everyone seeing how far behind he was. Tommy's math grades improved enough that his teacher noticed and praised him in class. The monthly pizza parties became a highlight for all the kids, but David was changing. He was more patient with the kids, more understanding when they acted out or shut down. He recognized the fear behind the bravado, the pain behind the anger. One evening, Patricia pulled him aside. "Whatever's going on with you, it's making you even better at this. I'm in therapy, dealing with my own foster care experience. Good. We should all be doing that, honestly. This work brings up a lot. Does it ever get easier, seeing these kids go through what we went through?" Patricia thought about it. "No, but it gets more meaningful. Every kid we help, it's like we're helping ourselves too. The version of us that needed someone to care." That night, David had a different dream. He was back in the Johnson house, but this time he was visiting, not living there. He walked through the rooms, looking at his younger self sitting on the stairs, and instead of feeling sad, he felt compassion. He woke up feeling lighter than he had in weeks. During his next therapy session, he told Dr. Martinez about it. "It sounds like you're starting to integrate your past with your present," she said, "seeing that kid you were with, understanding instead of trying to forget him. It's weird. I spent so long trying to be nothing like that kid, and now I'm realizing that kid is what makes me good at what I'm doing." "Exactly. Your pain has purpose. Not because pain is good, but because you're choosing to use it to help others." That week, Tommy asked David a question during their tutoring session. "Did you ever try to find your biological family?" David felt his chest tighten. "No. How come?" "I was removed for a reason. They weren't able to take care of me. I figured it was better to leave it alone. But don't you wonder about them?" Of course he did. Late at night, sometimes, David would think about the mother he barely remembered. Her face had faded from memory, but he remembered her voice, her laugh. He wondered if she ever thought about him. "Sometimes," David admitted, "but I don't know what I'd say to them. You could say you turned out okay, that even though they couldn't keep you, you made it anyway." David looked at this 11-year-old kid who somehow understood complicated things about forgiveness and closure. "Maybe someday," he said. But that night, David found himself searching, not for his biological family, not yet, but for other kids he'd been in care with, the ones whose names he still remembered. He found a few on social media. Some had clearly struggled, their profiles full of anger and chaos. Some had disappeared entirely. But others had made it, like him and Katie. They had families, jobs, lives. One profile caught his attention. A guy named Anthony who'd been in the same group home as David when they were 16. His bio said he was a social worker specializing in foster care. David sent a message. "Hey, I don't know if you remember me. We were at Riverside Group Home together in 2001. I'm working with foster kids now and came across your profile. Would love to reconnect." 3 days later, Anthony replied, "Of course I remember you. We should definitely talk. Are you free for coffee this weekend?" They met at a cafe downtown. Anthony looked different, older obviously, but he had the same easy smile David remembered. "Man, it's good to see you," Anthony said, shaking David's hand. "I've thought about you over the years. Wondered how you turned out." They spent 2 hours catching up, sharing stories, comparing notes on the system that had raised them. "Why'd you become a social worker?" David asked. Same reason you're volunteering, probably. I wanted to be better than the ones we had, the ones who didn't really see us. Do you ever think about how messed up it is? That we're the ones having to come back and fix things? Anthony nodded. All the time. But someone has to. And who better than people who actually understand? When they parted ways, Anthony said, "We should do this again. Maybe grab a few more people from back then. The ones who made it. A foster kid reunion?" David smiled. "That's either the best idea or the worst idea. Probably both." Over the next month, Anthony connected David with 3 other people from their past. They started a group chat, sharing memories, supporting each other, occasionally joking about the trauma in that dark way survivors do. It felt like finding a tribe he didn't know existed. People who understood without explanation, who got it when he said he still felt uncomfortable at family gatherings or struggled with the concept of unconditional love. One night, the group chat got deep. Someone asked if anyone had reconciled with their biological families. 2 people had. One hadn't and didn't plan to. Anthony said he'd tried, but his parents were still struggling with the same issues that got him removed. David typed, "I've been thinking about it lately. Not sure I'm ready," Anthony responded. "There's no rush. Do it if and when you're ready, not because you feel like you should." That felt right, like permission to take his time, to heal at his own pace. At his next therapy session, David talked about reconnecting with people from his past. "How does that feel?" Dr. Martinez asked. "Like I'm building something, not just moving forward, but creating connections between all the parts of my life, the past and the present, the kid I was and the person I am now." "That's beautiful, David. That's integration." Walking out of therapy that day, David felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, but wholeness, like pieces that had been scattered were finally coming together. Spring turned into summer, and David's work at the community center expanded in ways he never expected. What started as tutoring one kid had grown into coordinating 30 volunteers and organizing programs that served over 50 children in foster care. The monthly pizza parties became weekly activity clubs. David helped launch a college prep program for teens aging out of the system. But the biggest change wasn't in the programs. It was in David himself. The nightmares had mostly stopped. When memories came now, they didn't feel like ambushes. They were just parts of his story, some painful, some surprisingly good. Dr. Martinez said he'd done the hard work of processing his trauma, and now he could choose what to do with it. One Tuesday evening, Tommy showed up to their session with news that made David's heart sink. "They're moving me again," Tommy said quietly, staring at his math book without opening it. "What? Why?" "My foster parents are getting a divorce. The mom is moving out of state. So I have to go somewhere else." David felt anger flash through him. This was the 5th placement in 3 years for Tommy. Just when the kid was stable, making progress, feeling secure, the rug got pulled out again. "When?" 2 weeks. "They're still looking for a place." David wanted to say it wasn't fair, but Tommy knew that already. Instead, he said, "I'm still here. No matter where you move, as long as it's in the county, we'll keep doing our sessions." "Okay." Tommy looked up and his eyes were wet. "Really? Really? You're stuck with me, kid." That night, David couldn't sleep, but not because of nightmares. He kept thinking about Tommy, about all the kids cycling through placements, about how the system was supposed to protect them but often just moved them around like furniture. He called Katie, even though it was late. "Hey, sorry. I know it's late. It's fine." "What's going on?" He told her about Tommy, about feeling helpless to do anything except show up for 1 hour a week. "That hour matters, David. You know it does." "I know. I just wish I could do more."